it's an honor for me to address the House this afternoon and to speak about one of the critical challenges facing the world today, that is the ongoing illegal genocidal invasion of Ukraine by Russia and the important work that Canadians need to do in order to continue to support Ukraine in this struggle, this existential struggle for Ukraine, but also a critical battle for the defense of the free and democratic world. A critical part of this emerging new Cold War, this struggle between free democratic nations on the one hand and the neo-revisionist powers that are increasingly working together to combat the idea of universal human dignity, human rights, and democracy. With this broader frame in mind, it's critical for our security and it's critical for the values that we share as Canadians that Ukraine is able to prevail in this struggle and that we do all we can to support Ukraine to achieve a quick victory, as quickly as possible under the circumstances. Today we're of course debating a proposal for a next step on free trade between Canada and Ukraine, and it's important to recall that this process of pursuing Canada-Ukraine free trade started under the previous Conservative government, and in many cases we've seen trade deals that were begun, negotiated, even completed the negotiation process under the previous Conservative government, and this government has accepted that process. In one famous case, they fought to rename the treaty that had been negotiated by Conservatives, and of course now are eagerly taking credit for those steps. But it's important to underline the work that has been done and the ongoing work that needs to be done to support a strengthened free trade framework between Canada, especially between Canada and like-minded nations, and that partnership with Ukraine in the midst of this ongoing struggle, this ongoing invasion, is so important. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to acknowledge that the invasion of Ukraine is not as much in the news or in public discussion at the moment. It's the nature of news to comment on things that are new, and to some extent other world events and other challenges are capturing public attention right now, and those situations obviously need to be addressed as well. But the fact that it is maybe not being discussed as much or not in the news as much does not mean that the struggle isn't going on and isn't more critical than ever. In fact, we are seeing escalating abuses, horrifying atrocities as part of this illegal Russian invasion. We are seeing, for instance, multiplying instances of the abduction of children being stolen from Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine and sent to Russia, taken away from their parents. This is a horrific crime, and I can't imagine the pain that those families are going through to be living in occupying territories and then to have their children taken away from them. We are seeing sexual violence as a weapon of war on a massive scale not seen in Europe since at least the Second World War. Horrifying volumes of sexual violence that are being systematically perpetrated by the Russian regime. And these instances of abduction of children, of systemic sexual violence, of indiscriminate bombing and targeting civilians led this House in the early days of this invasion to recognize that this invasion constituted an act of genocide. And we stand as this House, I hope united in continuing to recognize that. And I think, Mr. Speaker, we need to recognize that as people follow this now, a year and a half since the further invasion, we hope that this war comes to an end quickly. We want this war to end in a quick Ukrainian victory. So do we want this war to go on for much longer? No, we don't. We want it to end in a clear, decisive Ukrainian victory where Ukrainians can exercise sovereignty over all of their territory and exercise democratic self-determination. But we must also countenance the possibility that things will not end quickly and that wars do not always follow the timelines that we hope for. And I think it is an obligation for us to stand firm in supporting Ukrainians in the midst of these circumstances. This is why Conservatives have been there from the beginning. In fact, Conservatives have been calling for more support earlier at every stage. It was Conservatives who led the G7 after the initial invasion in 2014 in having a strengthened international response. We pushed back when this government, upon taking office, stopped sharing radarsat satellite images with the government of Ukraine. We pushed back, we fought back against that. We called for tough sanctions to be imposed on the Putin regime prior to the further invasion beginning last February. Much of the world community anticipated this further invasion coming. We called, and comments on the record in this House and in committee, calling for tough sanctions beforehand, preemptive sanctions to try to deter the invasion. And it was a failure, I think, of the international community to really recognize the threat that was coming from the Putin regime and to impose preemptive measures in advance that might have stood a chance of deterring this horrific invasion. We called for those sanctions earlier. We called on this government to do more to support Ukrainian energy security and to supply the needed equipment and weapons. Of course, the government has taken some steps to support Ukraine, but our criticism has been that in order to bring about Ukrainian victory, it is vitally necessary to supply the equipment and support required as early in the process as possible, not just to make the announcements, but to get the delivery of that equipment as quickly and as early on in the process as possible. This is what we need in order to have Ukrainian victory, for Ukraine to have the tools and the equipment it needs to secure victory. And this is very important. Mr. Speaker, I hear from time to time people that are skeptical or critical about our support for Ukraine. To them, I would say a number of things. First of all, I welcome conversations with people, regardless of their opinion on this issue. Don't hesitate to call me, call my office. There are many good reasons why we should be supporting Ukraine, and I'm happy to make that case to anybody who's interested in having the conversation and listening. Some people ask about the cost. Well, how much is this costing us? But I would point, Mr. Speaker, to the costs of inaction. What are the costs of failing to stand up to the bully in the Kremlin? And you can look historically at the growing appetite for aggressive action by the Putin regime, where it started, where it has continued, the action in Chechnya, the invasion of Georgia, the continuing Russian presence in Moldova, and the invasion of Crimea in 2014. And if at each of those points there had been a stronger response from the international community, we might not have seen the aggression move on to the next step, much more costly at every next stage in terms of human life, in terms of the response that it has required. And I think we can now look back and say, if we had done more at some of these earlier points, the continuing strategy by Germany, for example, to be heavily reliant on Russian gas, that continued after Ukraine was already invaded in 2014. They continued to pursue Nord Stream 2 even after Russia had already illegally annexed Crimea and was continuing to be present in other parts of Ukraine illegally. So what are the costs of inaction? If we don't support Ukraine, then this aggression will continue. It will proceed, I believe, to threaten NATO countries. It could proceed to threaten Canada in our north. The cost of inaction is very high because this aggression will continue. Now, Mr. Speaker, Canada has a unique obligation in the midst of this challenge. Most of the world's democracies are small, densely populated nations. Canada, as a geographically vast energy-producing country, needs to be fulfilling our responsibility within the community of democratic nations to supply the democratic world with the energy security that it needs. We need to be stepping up, producing more energy, exporting more energy, relieving our partners and allies of their dependence on Russian energy. Purchases of energy from Russia are fueling their war machine, are fueling the slaughter, the systemic sexual violence, the abduction of children. It is being fueled financially by those energy exports. So what Canada needs to do, recognizing the unique opportunities and the unique responsibilities we have, is expand our energy production. Yes, it benefits our economy. Yes, it benefits Canadian workers. But I would say even more importantly, it is us fulfilling our responsibility in the world to provide that energy security that all countries need. Mr. Speaker, it is for such a time and such a responsibility that Canada is here. And yet this government has their ideological head in the sand and is just missing the opportunity that we have and the responsibility that we have to do more on the energy front. So I support expanding our trading relationships with Ukraine and other countries, but we need to do more in the energy security area, and we need to ensure that when announcements are made, we are delivering the goods as quickly as possible to ensure the vitally necessary victory for Ukraine and the forces of freedom everywhere.